of inflation, deflation, and maldisposition, of systemic manipulation of the cost or value of money or property, and of course, of inherent, irreversible, and therefore terminal multiplication of artificial indebtedness by the purposed obfuscation of our currency by the so-called central banking system. So this just goes on and on. We have, not only do we have Wall Street slow to disclose brokers' sins, we have a German bourse in talks to buy the big board. You know, the New York Stock Exchange is up for sale, you see. And so this thing which Americans and much of the rest of the world have wrongly considered to somehow symbolize or represent prosperity, when in fact it really represents how much earnings is denied producers of wealth, and thus is denying producers just reward for their production. You know, this thing which takes so much from us as it can under a system which itself, an obfuscation of the currency, which itself can only take more and more and more until it siphons up everything. This thing, which can't survive, evidently, under this obfuscation of the currency, is offered up for sale to Germany, who to attempt to survive further by under the the direction of someone who may think they have a better idea, but yet which idea is still subject to this obfuscation of the currency, and the fact that we the people have to adopt solution to survive, which solution may eradicate this whole board itself, this big board that they call the New York Stock Exchange. You see, so this is a very dubious deal. Now, do these people are they going to fall in line behind solution? Of course not. Because if solution was implemented, it takes predation out of the equation. And these people who are not investors at all, we have to remember this. Every day we watch the news and they lie to us, investors this, investors that. All these people are doing is buying ownership and trading ownership of a company which ownership already existed. Not a cent of this money goes to the companies which they have quote unquote invested in. The only time an investment exists is an initial public offering. You see, this is not investment at all. This is gambling on ownerships of companies, which is which ownership in the companies is extremely costly. There would be no such cost under mathematically perfected economy, because a company can fund itself merely by issuing a promissory obligation to pay for its needs as they consume of the assets that they acquire to go into business, you see. So instead of requiring quote-unquote investors, even in the very beginning, no such thing exists under mathematically perfected economy. In fact, there is no restriction of the circulation, which prevents people from either earning or issuing promissory obligations sufficient to launch them into business. The same money is required one way or the other, of course, eliminating its costs, and particularly eliminating perpetual costs is to the advantage of business. So in fact, what we're talking about here in this New York Stock Exchange and all the other such entities in the world is not about investment at all. We're talking about unnecessary cost imposed on businesses, on production, which costs, the ownership of which costs are merely traded back and forth by people in a process which contributes no investment whatsoever. Not only contributes no investment whatsoever to these activity just goes on and on. We have investment threatens Porsche deal. Porsche and Volkswagen are attempting to merge, and yet there's some alleged improprieties of Porsche which are going to kill this deal. But why are they merging? But for survival in the final days of a purported monetary system, which is merely a system of exploitation, which is terminal. You see, instead of investing all this effort into mergers and sales and reorganization and further borrowing at great cost, all of which is redundant, why not just solve the problem? In the midst of all this divisive and futile activity, we have, purported expert after purported expert, standing up proposing that something else is going to solve our problem. Something which always either doesn't solve the fundamental causes or merely treats the consequences of the fundamental cause of inevitable failure. So here we have in Deal Book another article, Mary Meeker on how to fix USA Incorporated. USA Incorporated. We're no longer a republic. We're to be considered as USA Incorporated according to Mary Meeker. Hey, Uncle Sam, Mary Meeker has some advice on how to fix the economy. In an essay for Bloomberg Business Week, Mrs. Meeker, the former queen of the internet, really, turned venture capitalist, there you are, urges taxpayers to think of themselves as shareholders in USA Incorporated. Not that they are shareholders, okay, but just to think of themselves as such a thing, okay? A debt-laden, bloated corporation. That investment, she writes, is at risk unless the government makes some serious changes. Well, of course. But what are the changes that she is going to advocate? Eradication of exploitation? I don't think so. Quote, the idea of the U.S. as a corporation is more than a thought experiment, she says. It's a way to reposition our approach to long-term problems. What would USA Incorporated be worth? Who would want to buy its shares as if you could sell them to somebody? And what would the turnaround expert recommend for a company that lost more, that the grammar's wrong, but it says lost more, I'll just read it the way it should read, lost more than $2 trillion net operating costs in 2010. Okay, well, does she treat the cause, the fundamental cause, that this loss is inevitable? Absolutely not. She presupposes that there's some managerial changes, which can possibly account for it. Truth of the matter is, the private sector is so much in debt that it can't afford even to service the federal debt, the entire federal debt that it's obligated to service. You see, so and the further matter is, Mary Meeker, is that this debt is manufactured by an artificial, unassented, imposed process by which a central banking system merely publishes evidence of our debts to each other, launders the principal into their possession, and assuming that the negligible costs of publication justify interest, yet applies interest to the entire principal, which isn't even its possession, by a process, therefore, which inevitably multiplies artificial indebtedness into terminal artificial indebtedness. And this woman is presupposing that there's some managerial improvements which could possibly account for this. Well, sure, you can point your finger to this, that, or the other thing that these oafs who rule us are doing wrong. Of course you can do that. But it doesn't mean that they can do it right under the system unless the system is rectified. So whatever she says in the rest of the article, she's wrong, wrong, wrong. The United States of America, like every other republic of the world, is not like an incorporation at all. What's wrong here is we have been denied absolute consensual representation. The government is not accountable to the people. It's financed into power by the very thing which is our enemy, the central banking systems. of every republic of the world. And this is the problem, Mary Meeker. It's how these people ascend to power, not what they do. It's how this debt is multiplied upon us, not that there's ostensibly some kind of managerial improvement which could account for it. Sure, you're not perfect, and these oafs certainly are far from perfect, but that doesn't mean it can be done without terminal failure unless we rectify the fundamental cause of failure, which is the money changers, the obfuscation of our currency, which launders principal into their possession and multiplies an artificial debt to the bankers into terminal artificial indebtedness. Sorry, Mary Meeker, you're the queen of nothing. All this just goes on and on. We have New York Times, Business Day. Behind a rise in auto sales, easier credit. Well, what do you expect? When the obfuscation of the currency dedicates ever more of the circulation to servicing an existent sum of debt, people can't assume further debt. You make it a little bit more comfortable, as little as you can, by reducing interest rates over and stretching out the life of the term of the loan over a longer period. You can reduce costs to the people so that you can indeed benefit with a slight rise in auto sales. Okay, but that is limited. It doesn't address the problem. The fundamental cause of why the sales are slumping is what I've called maldisposition for all this time, and that is a dedication of ever more of the circulation to servicing the escalating sum of artificial debt as opposed to sustaining the industry and markets which are obligated to do so. Simple as that. So all this just goes on and on and on. We have New York Times, Business Day. Geithner backs new financing approach for mortgages. New financing approach. Well, in truth, all that this lie of financing is this obfuscation of the currency. And of course, it obligates the purported debtor who merely issues their promissory obligation through the purported bank, which merely publishes the evidence of the promissory obligation, laundering the principal in its possession and multiplying the resultant debt into principal plus interest at the term of which, over the term of which, the resultant debt equals principal plus interest. So, there's nothing different nothing meaningfully different unless you resolve this purposed obfuscation of the currency, which Timothy Geithner is going to be the last person to do. So what are we saying here? New financing approach. This is just a perpetual lie. There's going to be a new currency, the Amero, the whatever, the World-O, or, Cheerio, or whatever. There's a new currency. These people who propose this are not the people. They are the enemies of the people. And they are here to change your money into this obfuscation, which perpetually enriches them, not only to an ever greater degree, but at an inherently escalating rate, even, until we're dispossessed of everything. So there's no new financing approach unless you eradicate interest. There's no justification of whatever you do unless you eradicate interest and pay the resultant principal at the rate of consumption or depreciation of the related property, which is, of course, what mathematically perfected economy is.